Hey students, welcome to lesson 4.6, Isosceles Triangles. Today our students will be able to use the Isosceles Triangle Theorem. Alright, well let's just get into it. So, you might remember this, but there are three different types of triangles. There's a scalene triangle, which has no congruent sides. No congruent sides. And it has no congruent angles. So what I'm saying here is that each side is going to be a different length. So if there's 5, this would be 6, and this would be 7. I know this is longer than that, but whatever. And this would be 30, this would be 60 degrees. This would be, well, that's a bad example. That looks a little more than 60. This would be 100 degrees. This would be 30 degrees, and this would be 50 degrees. So it has no congruent sides, no congruent angles. An isosceles triangle, this has 2 congruent sides, and it also has 2 congruent angles. So 2 of the sides would be the same. Now these two look the same, so this would be 5, this would be 5. Let's say this is 6. And then we would have 2 congruent angles on top of that. So this would be 40, this would be 40, this would be 100. So 2 congruent sides, 2 congruent angles. And finally, an equilateral, and the main word here is equal. And lateral, this word right here, actually means sides. So equal sides means as 3 congruent sides and 3 congruent angles. Root int. So if this was 5, this would be 5, and this would be 5. And furthermore, we know all the angles would be the same, which means they have to be 60. All 3 angles to add up to 180, and from all of these things have to be 60. Always like that. Now, next class we'll be talking about equilaterals, but for this class we're going to focus on isosceles triangles. So what is the isosceles triangle theorem? It's this. If we know 2 angles are congruent, so it's an isosceles triangle because it has 2 congruent angles, then the sides opposite those angles will be congruent. So if C is congruent to B, well, we know it's an isosceles because it has 2 congruent angles, right? Angles. But the opposite sides will also be congruent. So this side would be congruent. AB would be congruent to AC. So let's say C is 50 degrees, and B is 50 degrees, and this would have to be 80 degrees then. Well, then I know that this side over here is congruent to this side. AC is congruent to AB. AC is congruent to AB. So congruent angles are opposite congruent sides. All right? Now, the second part of this theorem is the same exact thing but reversed. If we have 2 congruent sides, so if this side is congruent to this side, so it's an isosceles triangle because it has 2 congruent sides, isosceles, the opposite angles will be congruent. So ED and DF are congruent. I know this angle, if I draw a line over it, will be congruent, and this angle will be congruent. So if ED is congruent to DF, I know angle E is congruent to angle F. So congruent sides are opposite congruent angles. All right, and all you have to do is draw these lines to show you which one are congruent. But let's show you some practice problems to see how to use this theorem. All right. So let's take a look at this example. We're going to find the missing angles in triangle DEF. And if we look at this, we know 2 pieces of information. One, we know DF is congruent to DE, and we know angle E is 65 degrees. So how can we find the rest of the angles? Well, using the isosceles triangle theorem, we know opposite angles are congruent opposite sides. So if you take your pencil, you draw an arrow to the opposite angles, you'll see that the opposite angles have to be congruent. So if that's 65, this is also 65. All right? Now we also know the 3 angles in a triangle have to add up to 180. So all we have to do is 180 minus 65 minus 65, and that would equal 50 degrees. All right? And all you have to do is draw these arrows, and I'll tell you which angles or sides are congruent. So let's try another one. In the figure below, CA is congruent to AT. We want to find all the missing angles again, okay? So we know CA is congruent to AT. Because it has two congruent sides, we know it's an isosceles triangle. And now we want to find the rest of the angles. So, how do we do that? Well, I know that this angle is going to have to be congruent to this angle, right? We just draw our lines opposite them, all right? It just helps to draw your lines. So this angle and this angle are congruent. Now we don't know what those two angles are, and we don't know one of them. So what we're going to do is say that they're both x, okay? We don't know something that we say they're x. Now, what we need to do is figure out which each angle is. And we can do that by saying we know that 80 plus the two angles, which are both x, are equal to 180 degrees. We learned how to solve this last time. We're going to subtract 80 from both sides. All right, and we get 2x equals 100. Divide by 2, divide by 2, you get x equals 50. So let's fill that in. I'll erase all this stuff. All right. And we know that these two angles have to be equal to 50. Now does that even make sense? Well, 50 plus 50 equals 100, and 100 plus 80 equals 180. So these do all add up to 180. Now an easier way to do this is the other way, just in case this helps. If you don't know either of these angles, you can just go 180, subtract the 80 from here, right? And that gives you 100. And then because these two angles have to be the same, you just divide that by 2 and you get 50. So that's two ways to solve that problem, all right? 1 and 2. You pick whatever's better for you. All right, let's check out this example. In triangle CAT, the measure of CAT is 46 degrees, and we know CA is congruent to AT. Find the measure of angle TCA. Now this is a little bit difficult because we don't have a triangle here. So maybe the first thing to do here when I see a question like this is to just draw your triangle. And in geometry, that's your best strategy. You can't see it, draw it. All right? Boom. Okay, now we know that we have our triangle CAT, all right? So let's label it CAT. We also know that CA is congruent to AT. And we know measure of angle CAT is 46 degrees, all right? So this is 46 degrees. We want to know the measure of TCA, right? TCA would be this angle. Remember, this is the vertex, the one in the middle. Well, how do we do that? Well, that's exactly like the last problem, now that we have it drawn, and it seems a lot easier. So first we're going to draw which angles are congruent. So opposite angle here, opposite here. So we know that these two are congruent angles. All right? And we'll put our x's here, because we don't know what these two are. And we'll do x plus 46 equals 180. Subtract 46 from both sides. All right, and we get 2x is equal to 134. Divide by 2, and we get x is equal to 67. Yep. Wait, hold on. Yes. All right. So we can just fill that in now. Let's fill in those angles that we just figured out. And we know that this is 67 degrees, and we know that this is 67 degrees. All right. So the question is, what's the measure of TCA? We know that that is 67 degrees. All right. Next problem. In triangle FGH, we know the measure of F is congruent to the measure of H. GF equals 10, GH equals 2x, and HF equals 14. What's the value of x? Well, once again, it's hard to do anything if you can't see it. So let's once again draw our triangle. All right. So we draw a triangle. Move that to the center. Good. And let's fill in what we know. We know measure of angle F is congruent to the measure of angle H. So first let's label this. This is FGH. We know F is congruent to h. This is an isosceles because two congruent angles. You know what? Let's draw our sides across, all right? And that tells us that this side is congruent to this side. Remember, opposite sides are congruent to opposite angles. All right, now we know GF is equal to 10. We know GH is equal to 2x. And we know HF is 14. We want to solve for x. Well, looking at this, we know that GF and GH are the same. GF and GH are congruent because it's an isosceles triangle and the opposite sides are congruent. And we might remember when things are congruent, you could set them up equal to each other. So the equation we could set up would be 10 is equal to 2x, right? We know that because GF should be the same as GH. We're trying to figure out what x has to be to make them congruent. We divide both sides by 2, and we get x is equal to 5. And does that make sense? Well, 2 times 5 is 10. This is 10. Yup, we did a beautiful job. Okay, next problems. Okay, let's try this problem. In the diagram below of ABC, we know AB is congruent to AC. So let's mark those. AB is congruent to AC. We know A is 5x plus 10. And we know B is 3x plus 26. What is the value of x? Now, what do we do here? Now, you might be thinking, maybe I said B equal to A, but I don't know that those two are congruent. We actually have to find which sides are congruent. And so let's draw our arrows. Now, starting from this side, I'm going to say that this angle, B, is congruent to angle C. So those two are congruent. So I can't just say 3x plus 26 is equal to 5x plus 10. But what I can do is fill in that this is also 3x plus 26, right? Because they're congruent. Now that I know what the three angles are, I could set up my equation. And that is, these three angles should add up to 180. And we did this in the first lesson. So 3x plus 26 plus 3x plus 26 plus 5x plus 10 equals 180. And what you just did here was added your three angles. Okay? And the three angles, 1, 2, and 3, have to add up to 180. Now from here, we're just going to move everything over. So we're going to subtract the 10 from both sides. We're going to subtract 26 from both sides, and we're going to subtract the other 26. All right? Draw a line down. So I'm subtracting 10, subtracting 26, and I'm subtracting another 26 from 180. When I do that, I get, let's see, 170 minus 50 is 120, 118. Yup, I just did that in my head. Are you impressed? And I get 3x plus 3x plus 5x. From here, I combine like terms. I get 11x is equal to 118. And I just divide both sides by 11 now. And I think this might be a decimal. And when you do that, you get 10.727. All right, that is how that one is done. Okay. Oh, sorry. Going down, we're just going to do two more problems. Find all missing angles. Now, what you see here is that this is an isosceles triangle right here. So the missing angles we're going to find is here, 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 and here. All those angles we have to fill in for. So, how do we do it? Well, let's use the information you know. When you do this, you're like a detective. And the first thing we see here is that we have an isosceles triangle here, right? Because this side is congruent to this side. That means we know that these angles are going to be congruent to each other, right? So I know this one is going to be 50 degrees. Perfect. All right? That isosceles helped us out a lot. Now from there, there's two things I can do. First, to find this angle right here at the top, I'll just do 180 minus 50 minus 50, right? Because I know the two angles, and this is a triangle. When I do that, I get 80 degrees. So I know this one is 80. The other thing I can do is right here, if you remember these kind of angles, this is a linear pair. Don't forget that this is a straight line, and we know straight lines are 180 degrees. So I could do 180 minus 50 degrees equals 130 degrees. Boom, filled that in. Now finally, to find my last angle, which is up here, what I have to do is just do 180 minus 130 minus 20. Why? Because let's look, we have a triangle right here again. See the triangle that I'm outlining for you? We know two of the angles, and we're just finding third angle. So we subtract 130 and 20, and that gives us 30 degrees. And that is how you find all the angles. All right, final question. Once again, we know BD is congruent to BC. Find the measure of angle A. Okay, a little tougher. So BD is congruent to BC. And once again, we know that this is an isosceles triangle because it has two congruent sides, and we know opposite angles are congruent. Let's draw our lines. So if this is 48, we know this is also 48 degrees. All right. Once again, to find these other angles, I want to find A right here. So let's just fill in what we know. So to find this angle, I'm just going to do 180 minus 48 minus 48. And that gives me 104. Okay. Oh, that's not right at all. That gives me 84. 84 degrees. This is 84 degrees. Now furthermore, once again, this is a linear pair right here at the bottom. So I just do 180 minus 48. And that gives me 32 degrees. Finally, I want to find A, and right here we have another triangle. So we just have to do 180 minus 32 minus 26. And when we do that, we get 120, sorry, that's 132. Oops, my bad. And this, when we do 180 minus 132 minus 26, we get 22 degrees. All right, guys, that's it for today. Remember, don't ever, 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 ever eat moldy cheese. Don't do it.